I had not even put away the last funeral flowers from my kitchen table when my sister raised a glass at her son's first birthday party and smiled like she was about to tell a funny story. Then she looked straight at me, right there in front of my parents, our family friends, and a room full of relatives, and said, "Lucas is Adam's son, and he has a right to half the value of your $900,000 house." I just stood there and laughed. Not because I was okay, not because I was too shocked to speak. I laughed because I knew something Michelle did not. My name is Jessica White. I am 34 years old, and I live in the suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut, in the white colonial house my husband Adam used to call the most grown-up thing we ever did. Adam and I had been married for 11 years. We were not perfect, but we were real. Ours was the kind of marriage built on small, gentle habits, mortgage payments, arguments over kitchen paint, and those quiet nights when two people sit beside each other without speaking and still feel completely full. 3 months ago, Adam died from a ruptured aneurysm so suddenly that I still had not learned how to say the words, "My husband died," without feeling like I was talking about somebody else's life. I was still trying to survive that grief when Michelle, my younger sister, stepped into the biggest empty space in my life with an accusation that could have burned everything down. Adam's name, the truth of my marriage, the ownership of the house we built together. Michelle has always been the storm in this family. I was always the one cleaning up after her, apologizing for her, swallowing my own anger to keep the peace. For years I lied to myself and called that kindness. I told myself that if I stayed patient enough, calm enough, good enough, Michelle would hurt people less. But 1 week after my husband's funeral, my sister decided to use his death to take what she had never been able to get while he was still alive. And she thought I would fall apart. She was wrong. That Sunday afternoon, I sat in my car outside my parents' house for a few extra minutes, both hands on the wheel, too drained to get out. I had chosen a simple white dress. I did not have the energy to pretend life was normal again, but I also could not bring full mourning into my nephew's birthday party. It had only been a week since we buried Adam, and even driving there alone felt like trying to play a role that was too heavy for me. I did not go because I wanted to. I went because my mother said Michelle would be hurt if I stayed away, because family needs to show up for each other. On the drive over, I thought about turning around 3 separate times. But guilt is an old habit, and I was too tired to fight it. The moment I stepped inside, I was swallowed by blue ribbons, the smell of sweet buttercream, children's music playing a little too loud, and those quick sideways looks people give a grieving widow when they do not know what to say. Aunt Carol hugged me longer than usual. A neighbor told me I looked good, the kind of empty thing people say when they have nothing useful to offer. Michelle came out of the kitchen holding Lucas, her hair carefully curled, her lips glossy, her cream dress hugging her body in a way that said she had thought hard about how she wanted to look. She smiled at me with a brightness so polished it felt fake. I took Lucas into my arms and breathed in the soft baby powder smell in his hair. His tiny hand grabbed the chain around my neck. That moment made my chest tighten, because babies are innocent, and adults almost never are. Michelle stood beside me, watching closely, like she was waiting for something. All week she had been texting me about Adam's lawyer, about paperwork, about whose name the house was under. I had felt uneasy, but I kept pushing it aside. Then I looked around the room and saw relatives talking in low, broken voices. I saw my mother glancing back and forth between me and Michelle. A cold feeling started moving down my spine. And when Michelle tapped a spoon against her wine glass to get everyone's attention, I understood. This party had never really been about Lucas. She stood in the middle of the living room with one hand around the stem of her glass and the other resting on the back of Lucas's high chair, like she was about to give a sweet little thank you speech after a normal family gathering. But I saw something else. I saw the shine in her eyes. I saw the tightness in the corners of her mouth. I saw the way her whole body seemed to hum with excitement that had nothing to do with her son's birthday. The room slowly went quiet. The children's music still played in the kitchen, sounding all wrong now. Michelle cleared her throat, smiled at everyone, then turned toward me. That was the moment my stomach tightened. Every instinct in me knew what was coming was not a thank you, not a toast, not a speech about motherhood. She said there was a truth that had been hidden too long. She said she could not stay silent while Lucas's future was at risk. I stood near the food table with a paper plate in my hand, a piece of untouched cake on it, and it felt like the room had shifted a few feet away from me. Everyone was watching Michelle. Only I was watching the way she picked her words, the way she paused, the way she pressed a hand to her chest like someone about to suffer nobly for the truth. Then she said it slowly, clearly, making sure every person in the room heard each word. Lucas is Adam's son, not my ex-boyfriend's. Aunt Carol dropped her fork onto her plate. My mother let out a small, painful breath. My father blinked several times, like his mind needed a few extra seconds to catch up. Someone near the kitchen whispered, "Oh my God." I heard all of it, but it came to me like sound through water. For 1 second, pain still went straight through me. Even before my thoughts could line up, hearing Adam's name tied to cheating made my throat close. But then, Michelle kept looking at me, waiting, hungry for the moment I broke down. She wanted tears. She wanted rage. She wanted a scene. And that changed something in me. So I laughed. The second my laugh ended, Michelle moved like she had been waiting for that exact opening. She bent down, set her wine glass beside the birthday cake, then slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. The whole room seemed to stop breathing. I stood still, my hands cold, but my mind was suddenly getting clearer in a very different way. This was not a sudden confession. This was a performance. Michelle said Adam knew his responsibilities. She said he had left instructions in case the truth got buried after his death. Then she pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it by the edge like she was holding the final proof of justice. She called it an addition to his will. The second she said that, my heart started pounding harder, but not because I believed her, because I understood just how far she was willing to go. I looked at the paper from a few steps away. The font looked familiar, but wrong. The signature at the bottom looked like Adam's, but too stiff, too forced, like someone had copied it carefully instead of writing it naturally. The wording was wrong, too. Adam did not write in dramatic circles. He was direct, short, almost brutally clear with language. That page sounded like someone who liked theater more than truth. Michelle read a few lines in a voice that cracked just enough to sound real. She said Adam wanted Lucas protected. She said he knew I would never share willingly. She said he had put her in charge of speaking up if anything happened to him. My mother started crying right then. Aunt Carol covered her mouth. My father still said nothing. I listened, but more than the words, I watched Michelle. Her eyes did not stay on the paper for long. She kept checking the room, measuring reactions like a gambler seeing whether her bet was paying off. Then she dropped the part she had really come for. In a calmer voice, she said Lucas had a legal right to part of my house. And there it was, clear as glass. This was never about truth. I heard her talking about inheritance rights. I heard people start whispering about DNA tests, lawyers, and responsibility. And in that moment, everything became cold and simple inside me. Before that, shock had still been moving through me like pain without shape. But once Michelle shifted from tears to property, from Adam's name to the value of my home, I knew exactly what I was looking at. She was not here to reveal some painful secret. She was here to take control of the story. That is why I laughed. That laugh made Michelle pause for one quick beat. She wanted me shattered. She needed me to react in the most obvious way possible, so the whole room would immediately cast me as the bitter wife denying an innocent child. If I cried, she would become the brave single mother telling the truth. If I screamed, she would have proof that I was cruel. But I knew one thing that made her whole performance absurd. 2 years earlier, I had sat beside Adam in a bright, cold doctor's office while a surgeon explained his vasectomy and the success rate. On the drive home, Adam joked that he loved me enough to refuse diapers, formula, and sleepless nights in his 40s. The memory came back so sharply that I could almost feel his hand resting on my knee again. I was not about to shout that across my parents' living room. My husband's private medical history was not something I wanted to throw around like a weapon next to birthday cake and balloons. I needed more than a heated denial. I needed Michelle to keep talking. I needed her to go far enough that there would be no easy way back. So I looked her straight in the eye and said calmly that I would not argue on Lucas's birthday, but I would also not let anyone smear my husband. Then I told her to go ahead if she had more to say. I left my parents' house feeling like I had just stepped out of a room with no air in it. On the way to my car, my mother grabbed my arm, eyes red, and quietly asked whether what Michelle said could possibly be true. That question stopped me cold. Not because I doubted Adam, because 1 week after burying my husband, I was already being asked to defend him from my own family. I gently moved my mother's hand away and told her I would not answer anything in the front walkway like that. Then I got into my car. The drive home felt shorter than usual, maybe because I barely remember it. When I opened the front door, I almost expected to hear Adam's voice from the living room, or the sound of his glass touching the kitchen counter like it did every night. But there was only silence. Thick, cold silence. And inside that silence, Michelle's words got louder. She had not just lied about my husband. She had walked into the most private part of my marriage and dragged it through dirt in front of our family. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of wine. But the glass just sat there untouched. My phone lit up again and again. Aunt Carol texted that I should think about the child. A cousin asked whether I needed a lawyer, as if Michelle's claim had already become real. My mother sent a message saying she just wanted everything handled peacefully. The last text came from Michelle. I didn't want to embarrass you, but Lucas deserves what belongs to him. I read that line over and over until I felt sick. She had already made herself the victim before I had even fought back. That was when I remembered the bottom drawer in Adam's desk. A few months earlier, he had once told me that if Michelle ever caused real trouble again, I should open the dark blue file inside. At the time, I thought he was overreacting. That night, I pulled open the drawer, took out the file, and felt the real fight begin. I brought the dark blue file to the kitchen table like it weighed far more than paper. The house was quiet. The clock on the stove close to 1 a.m, and the soft yellow light over the counter made everything look both familiar and strange. I sat down in the chair Adam always used for his morning coffee, rested my hands on the file for a few seconds to steady my breathing, then opened it. Right on top was a white envelope with Adam's handwriting on it. Just seeing his writing made pain hit my chest so hard I had to stop. I opened the letter more carefully than I needed to, as if one rough move could somehow make him disappear all over again. The note was short, very Adam, no extra softness, no fake comfort. He wrote that if I was reading that letter, then Michelle had probably crossed another line. He said he was sorry he had not told me everything while he was alive, but he did not want to put more weight on me unless things truly got bad. I read each line slowly. Adam mentioned things I had always treated like small, awkward moments. He wrote about late-night texts Michelle had sent him in a tone that was too personal. He wrote about times she found excuses to stop by when I was not home and tried to stay longer than necessary. He wrote about one family party where Michelle drank too much, hugged him for too long, and made him physically pull her hands away. I remembered those moments. I remembered thinking Adam was being too harsh with my sister. Reading his words, shame moved through me in a way I was not ready for. Then I got to the line that almost made me break right there in the kitchen chair. Jess, if she ever tries to tie that child to me, please do not let it make you question our marriage. I chose the right woman, and I never cheated on you. I set the letter down and covered my mouth with my hand. My eyes burned instantly. Ever since Michelle made that claim at the birthday party, some part of me had still been carrying a pain I could not name, even though logic told me her story had holes in it. But those words gave me something I needed more than proof in that moment. They gave me Adam's voice back. Under the letter were typed notes, a business card for an attorney named Martin Klein, and a separate clipped stack of medical records. I stared at that stack for a long time. Then I reached for my phone. I called Martin Klein at nearly 3 in the morning, wide awake in the strangest way, exhausted and sharp at the same time. I expected voicemail. I expected maybe a tired, irritated voice. Instead, he picked up on the second ring with a calm, clear tone, like my call was not outside the list of things he had already prepared for. I introduced myself. I said Adam's name. There was one brief pause on the other end. Then Martin said he was very sorry for my loss and immediately asked the question I had not even said out loud yet. What did Michelle do? That made my skin go cold. I leaned against the kitchen counter, holding the phone harder, and told him everything that happened at Lucas's birthday party. The public claim. The fake page she called an addition to the will. The way she jumped from betrayal to inheritance. Martin did not interrupt once. He let me finish. Then he told me to keep every message, not answer anything except to direct future communication through a lawyer, and absolutely not argue with Michelle in public. He said people like my sister often win the first round through emotion, not truth. If I reacted the way she wanted, I would help her keep control of the story. I sat down and looked at the papers in front of me and asked the question that had been tight in my chest since opening the file. Had Adam really met with him because of Michelle? Martin said yes. He told me Adam had met with him several times over the last 2 years because he was concerned Michelle had started crossing personal boundaries and might create serious trouble if she felt rejected or if her own life started falling apart. Hearing that hurt and relieved me at the same time. Adam had not been cold for no reason. He had seen a danger I kept trying to shrink. When I asked about the medical records, Martin paused for a few seconds, then confirmed the part I already knew but still needed to hear from someone else. Adam had gotten a vasectomy 2 years before Lucas was conceived. The procedure was fully documented. The follow-up testing showed it had worked. I closed my eyes and tears came immediately. Not because I was surprised, because I understood Michelle had lied with a level of cruelty even I had never fully imagined. After that call, there was no way I could sleep. I sat at the kitchen table while the sky outside stayed black and let my memory drag me backward through moments I had always filed away as awkward but harmless. Now, from the place I was sitting in, after my sister had publicly lied 1 week after my husband's funeral, everything looked different. 3 years earlier, at Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house, Michelle had laughed and said in front of everybody that if I had not met Adam first, maybe she would have stolen him from me. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. The polite, automatic laugh women use to smooth over ugly things. Adam did not laugh. At the time, I thought he was just in a bad mood. Now I remembered the way he put down his fork and stayed quiet the rest of the meal. I remembered another time Michelle asked Adam to come fix her sink, even though she could easily have called a plumber or waited for me. That night, while I was brushing my teeth, Adam's phone lit up on the bathroom counter. Michelle had texted, "Thank you for today. My sister doesn't understand how good you are." I remember reading it, frowning, and telling Adam she was being inappropriate again. He only said, "I know." At the time, I still wanted to believe it was just uncomfortable, nothing more. Then Lucas was born, and Michelle started making jokes that made my skin crawl even though I kept forcing myself to ignore them. Every time Adam held the baby, she would laugh and say things like, "Kids can tell who belongs to them." One time she looked at me and said, "Lucas liked calm men just like his father." I told myself it was just dumb teasing from someone with no boundaries. Looking back, those comments felt less like jokes and more like little tests, like she was checking how far she could push before anyone stopped her. The part that hurt most was realizing Adam had told me more than once that Michelle did not respect limits, and I responded first, like a sister, not like a wife. I told him not to make it bigger than it was. I said Michelle was impulsive, not cruel. That night, alone under the kitchen light, I understood my need to keep peace had left him defending himself for far too long. The next morning, I had not even finished making coffee before my phone started vibrating nonstop on the counter. The first call was from my mother. Her voice was low and rough, soaked in that familiar panic she always had whenever Michelle caused chaos and left the rest of us to sort it out. She said Michelle had not slept all night, that she was falling apart, that Lucas did not deserve to be dragged into a fight. I listened, staring into the steam rising from my cup, and realized no one had asked whether I had slept after my sister smeared my dead husband's name in public. After my mother came Aunt Carol. She texted that if Michelle was telling the truth, I should not take my anger out on a child. A cousin asked whether I was willing to talk like an adult instead of making everything worse. Every message sounded polite on the surface, but underneath them all was the same assumption. I was the one expected to stay calm, give more, be more mature than the person who had just humiliated me. Michelle always won that way in our family. She created the storm, and then everyone turned to me and asked why I had not rebuilt the house yet. Around noon, Michelle texted too. She sent a picture of Lucas asleep on a blue blanket, his cheeks round, his mouth slightly open, completely innocent. Under it, she wrote, "I just want my son to have what belongs to him." I stared at that message and felt disgust rise in my throat. She was using her baby as a shield, like motherhood could turn a lie into a legal right. I did not argue. I reopened Martin's email from that morning, copied the exact line he told me to send, and replied, "All future communication needs to go through my attorney." Almost immediately, Michelle called me and left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking, like I had just pushed a struggling single mother off a cliff. She said I was trying to use money and lawyers to scare her into silence. I listened, put the phone face down on the counter, and finally saw something clearly. Michelle did not just want people to believe her, she wanted me to react hard enough that everyone would pity her even more. Martin Klein's office was on the third floor of an old brick building in downtown Hartford, the kind of place that smells like paper, black coffee, and overworked air conditioning. I got there 10 minutes early and still felt late for something that should have happened years before. His assistant led me into a small conference room with a dark wooden table, 2 leather chairs, and a window looking out over a rain-dotted parking lot. I set down my bag, sat, then immediately stood again because I could not bear the feeling of staying still while my mind kept spinning. Martin walked in carrying a thick file, shook my hand once and sat down. His manner was professional, but warm enough that I did not feel like I was spilling my life to a stranger. He did not open with a long speech of sympathy. He turned Adam's official will toward me and started walking through it page by page in a steady, exact voice. Everything was clean, valid, notarized, dated. There was no hidden addition, no private note giving Michelle anything, nothing at all like what she had waved around at the birthday party. I looked at Adam's familiar signature at the bottom of the real document and felt like my lungs finally opened all the way. Michelle had created something ugly enough to shake me, but she could not erase what was real with a fake sheet of paper. Martin then showed me scans of notes Adam had kept over months, then over years. Dates, times, short descriptions, even emails Adam had sent to himself just to preserve a record, like he knew the day might come when he needed to prove he was not imagining the danger. I read one note about a late-night text from Michelle. Another about a visit when she stayed in my house too long while I was gone. I had to stop more than once because the combination of grief and shame was almost too much. Adam had been doing the quiet, unpleasant work of protecting both of us while I kept asking him not to make things harder for my family. Martin did not push me to speak. He simply moved the medical records toward me and said this was the part that could end Michelle's lie if we used it the right way. I opened the file. Adam's name was right there at the top. Below it were the date of his vasectomy, the follow-up notes, and the lab result confirming that the procedure had been successful. No gray area, no emotional room for doubt. I looked up at Martin, and he told me calmly that records like that were strong legally, but timing mattered. The truth alone was not enough. The way we used it would shape the whole fight. When I left Martin's office, I kept thinking about the 2 options in front of me. One was to call my mother, my father, every single person who had sat in that living room and heard Michelle cry, then throw the real documents in their faces and end the lie in one afternoon. The other option was harder. I could hold back the strongest proof and let Michelle keep talking, keep pushing, keep walking deeper into her own lie. Martin thought that was the smarter move. And the worst part was, I knew he was right. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. Rain misted the windshield. My phone lay silent in the passenger seat like something waiting to come alive. My whole body was tired from lack of sleep, sore from grief, tight with anger. And yet under all that, something was taking shape inside me. This time, I was not going to be the one who cleaned up Michelle's mess. When I got home, the first thing I did was open my laptop and make a new folder. I started saving screenshots of every text, every missed call, every voicemail. I wrote down the order of events, who contacted me, what they said, and how Michelle kept trying to cast herself as the victim. The more I typed, the clearer the full picture became. She had not told one lie in panic. She was building a whole story where I was the cold, wealthy widow, and she was the single mother bravely fighting for her son. That evening, my mother called again. She said the two of us should meet privately, no lawyers, no making this bigger than it needed to be. I stood in the kitchen looking at the glass Adam used every evening and realized I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. Every time Michelle caused damage, everyone wanted to solve it with my softness. I told my mother calmly that this was no longer a disagreement between sisters. Michelle had lied about a dead man, forged a document, and tried to claim property. If she wanted to keep speaking, she could do it through my lawyer. An hour later, Michelle texted that if I tried to silence her, she would hire her own attorney. When I read that message, I knew for the first time in days that I was ready. 3 days later, Martin called me late in the morning and said a letter had just arrived from Michelle's attorney. I was standing in the laundry room folding the last of Adam's shirts, the ones I still had not had the strength to fully put away. The moment Martin said those words, I set the shirt down on the dryer and felt my heart drop. I had known this might happen, but there was still something chilling about seeing Michelle's lie take on an official shape. I drove to Martin's office with my whole body tight the entire way. The sky was gray, the roads still wet, and every red light felt longer than usual. When I walked into the conference room, the letter was already on the table beside a pen and a glass of water no one had touched. Martin slid it toward me and let me read it first. The paper was heavy, the language was careful, the tone was polite enough to sound legal, but the farther I got into it, the more obvious the real game became. They were not writing like people who had certainty. They were writing like people who hoped I would be scared enough by the mess to give in. The letter referred to the possibility that Lucas was Adam's biological son. It said Michelle wanted a private resolution for the child's sake. It suggested that Lucas may have a right to part of Adam's estate. It also mentioned a separate expression of Adam's wishes, but it never clearly called that fake page a valid legal addition to the will. That vagueness made my blood go cold in a different way. Michelle had not just lied. She had found someone willing to dress the lie in formal language and pressure. Martin sat across from me and pointed out every weak part of the letter. No DNA, no notarization, no firm legal claim, just carefully chosen uncertainty meant to scare me. He said this was the kind of letter people sent when they hoped the other side would pay to make the problem disappear. Hearing that made me angry, but it also made me steadier. That was Michelle. She did not need to win in court right away. She just needed me exhausted enough to surrender before the real fight began. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the letter again. A different kind of anger settled in me then, slower and harder. For days I had still mostly been reacting, grieving, flinching, defending. But in that quiet room, I understood this was not going to end with a soft family conversation. If Michelle wanted to turn my mourning into a negotiation, I would let truth go all the way to the place it needed to go. On the drive home, one thing Martin said stayed in my head. He told me people who lie like this usually do not work from emotion alone. They usually have one piece of real information, something small but true, enough to make the bigger lie sound believable. That thought followed me the whole way back. When I got home, I did not turn on the lights right away. Gray afternoon light came through the windows, enough to let me see everything familiar in the living room in a way that suddenly felt strange. I stood in the safest place I had ever known and started pulling through my memory on purpose, not to defend anybody, but to find what I had missed. One image came back very clearly. More than a year earlier, Michelle had stopped by the house while I was at the grocery store. Adam was working from home that day. When I got back, she was still there, sitting in the kitchen with a half-empty glass of water, saying she had wanted to wait for me. I had thought it was odd because Michelle is not patient by nature. I even apologized for making her wait. Adam had just nodded. That same night, while cleaning up, I noticed the drawer beneath the dining room sideboard, where Adam sometimes kept documents, was slightly open. I had shut it without thinking twice. Now that memory came back with a completely different weight. Michelle had been alone in that kitchen for quite a while. She knew exactly where we kept important papers. I went straight to the desk, opened every drawer, checked every stack. Nothing was obviously missing, but some things were not where they usually belonged. A file slightly crooked, an envelope tucked back in at a different angle. Tiny changes, easy to dismiss, but enough to leave the feeling that somebody had gone through things that were not theirs. I stood there with one hand on the drawer and felt a cold new possibility take shape. Michelle did not need to steal original papers. She only needed to see them, photograph them, memorize the layout, the name of Adam's lawyer, the look of his signature. With that much, she would have enough material to build something that felt convincing to people who never looked closely. I went back to the kitchen table, opened Adam's old email account access that Martin had already helped preserve, and searched through the archived drafts and notes. After a few minutes, I found a subject line that made my heart dip. Michelle in office drawer again. I opened it. The message was short, almost like a note to himself. And for the first time, I understood Adam had seen this before I ever did. The next day, I asked my parents to come over. I told them only that I needed to talk, and that this time I was not interested in smoothing anything over. My mother arrived first, carrying that familiar anxious expression she always had when she sensed conflict and wanted it to disappear before it became real. My father came after her, still holding his car keys, looking heavy and uncomfortable, like he already knew this was not going to be easy. I made coffee, but no one drank it. The kitchen was so quiet the spoon against the mug sounded too loud. I sat across from them and told them I had not invited them over to hear more guessing, and not to negotiate how quiet I should stay so the family would not be embarrassed. I had invited them because Michelle had crossed a line that could not be softened with nicer words. My mother immediately said Michelle was panicking, that being a single mother had made her unstable. When she said that, a deep tiredness moved through me. My whole life, everything Michelle did had been wrapped in some gentle explanation, and the consequences had always somehow been handed to me. I looked at my mother and told her that desperation does not turn forgery into truth, and it does not turn slander into pain that deserves sympathy. Then I started laying it out. I talked about the times Michelle borrowed money and disappeared, the time she lied to an ex-boyfriend about being pregnant to keep him from leaving, the late-night texts she sent Adam, the times she came by my house when I was gone, the way she behaved as if the boundaries inside another woman's marriage were something she could test and stretch. I spoke with the voice of someone who was done pretending not to see a pattern. My father stayed quiet for a long time. My mother started crying, but this time her tears did not make me stop. She said Michelle was not a bad person, just lost. I told her loving somebody who is lost does not mean the whole family has to walk down the wrong road with them just to make them feel less alone. That seemed to hit her harder than I expected. Finally, my father asked whether I had proof or whether I was just connecting things through anger. I looked at him and felt the silence in the kitchen tighten. Then I told him yes, I had proof, solid proof. But before I showed it, I wanted to hear one thing from both of them. If the evidence proved Michelle lied, would they stand with the truth this time, or would they ask me again to stay quiet so the family could still look decent from the outside? Neither of them answered right away. That silence said enough. I stood up, walked to the cabinet where I had put the dark blue file back, and brought it to the table. My mother stopped crying instantly. My father watched every move I made, more carefully than before. I opened the file slowly, not because I wanted drama, but because I hated that I had to take the most private part of my marriage and spread it out in front of other people just to defend myself from a filthy lie. I took out the medical records first. White pages, Adam's name at the top. Cold, objective, unfeeling in the way paper sometimes is. I slid them toward my parents and said very clearly that 2 years before Lucas was conceived, Adam had a vasectomy. There was a follow-up. There was a test result showing the procedure had worked, which meant, medically speaking, Lucas could not be his child. No one spoke at first. My mother touched the top page like the paper might burn her. My father put on his glasses, bent down, read the dates, then read them again. I watched both of them face the truth and felt two things at once. Relief that what I knew was finally outside my own body. Pain that Adam was not here to defend himself, and I had to put something so private on the table for him. My mother reacted first. She said very quietly that procedures like that can sometimes fail. I had expected that. I turned the page, pointed to the follow-up lab result, and said Adam's lawyer had already reviewed it too. This was not a guess. This was a full medical record. The kitchen went silent again, but this time the silence had weight. This time, it was truth. My father leaned back in his chair like something had gone out from under him. He looked at me, then at the papers, and asked in a voice that sounded suddenly older why Michelle would do something like this. The anger in me had cooled by then into something harder. I told him because she wanted money, because she knew people would go soft for the image of a struggling single mother, and because the dead are the easiest people to slander. They cannot speak back. My mother started crying again, but now it was different. She was not crying to protect Michelle anymore. She was crying because she was finally being forced to see what she had spent years refusing to look at. I did not get up to comfort her. I let both of them sit there with the papers, just like I had sat alone with them for the past few nights. After a while, my father closed the file, put both hands on it, and said very quietly that Michelle had gone too far this time. After my parents left, I stayed at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at the file as if it still had more to say. Proving Adam could not be Lucas's father destroyed Michelle's biggest lie, but it did not explain the full level of planning behind her performance. I knew there was more in the papers Adam had left, more he had kept, because he understood that one day truth might need more than one clean answer. That night I called Martin and told him how the conversation with my parents went. He listened and then told me to go back through the texts and notes Adam had saved. I spread everything over the table, opened my laptop, and started reading slowly. There were messages Michelle had sent Adam late at night, short but so far past normal boundaries that I had to stop several times to breathe. She asked when I would be out of town. She said if Adam ever changed his mind, she would know how to keep it secret. One message made my hands go cold. Lucas looks at you like he knows who his real father is. The more I read, the clearer it became that this lie had not come from one desperate moment. Michelle had been carrying the idea for a long time, testing it through half-jokes and strange comments, keeping it in reserve as an exit plan for the day her own life got bad enough. Adam had even documented something that happened in the garage after Christmas dinner 2 years earlier. Michelle had been drinking, cornered him while everyone else was still inside and tried to kiss him. Adam pushed her away, told her very clearly it would never happen, and wrote down the entire incident that same night. The more I read, the more ashamed I felt. Adam had been quietly protecting himself from my sister, while I was still asking him to be gentler so the family would not crack. Martin told me the evidence did more than erase suspicion of an affair. It showed a pattern of boundary crossing, obsession, and planning. If needed, it could change the whole direction of the case. That was when he suggested something bolder. Instead of letting this play out through texts and phone calls, we would force Michelle to sit down in front of the family, in front of lawyers, and in front of the truth. I held my phone, looking at the pile of proof around me, and knew he was right. If this was going to end, Michelle could not just be corrected. She had to be made to look directly at her own lie. The night before the meeting Martin arranged, I walked around my house like I was learning how to live inside my own life again. I moved from the kitchen to the living room, from the living room to the stairs, then stood for a long time outside the bedroom door without opening it all the way. Adam was everywhere, his gardening boots by the back door, the blue ceramic mug he liked, a magazine still folded on his side table. The grief of losing him was still there, low and constant, but for the first time since the funeral, I felt something else pushing through it. It was not softness. It was not sadness. It was sharper, clearer. It felt like waking up. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a black pen. At first, I thought I was going to write down what I wanted to say to Michelle, or what questions needed to be asked at the meeting. But what came out instead was about my childhood. About how Michelle was always the center of every storm, and I was the child people praised for being mature, easy, responsible. That sounds nice until you understand the hidden bill behind it. I was the one expected to understand more, yield more, clean up more. I grew up believing it was my job to keep the family stable, even if the price was swallowing my own anger and pretending unfair things were fine. The more I wrote, the more clearly I saw how that pattern had followed me into my marriage with Adam. I loved him fully, and he loved me with a calm steadiness I had never known before. But there had been times when I stood between him and Michelle and chose smoothing things over instead of protecting his boundary. I had told him not to take the late-night messages so seriously. I had said he was reading too much into it. Looking back now, I understood something hard. Loyalty in the wrong direction can look a lot like kindness until the damage arrives. I turned the page and wrote 3 short lines, slowly, clearly, like I was pinning them into my own life. I do not owe Michelle my silence. I do not owe my parents a comfortable version of the truth. I do not owe anyone Adam's dignity just so my family can avoid shame. Right then, my phone lit up. Michelle had sent one short message. I hope you're civilized enough not to hurt Lucas over an adult issue. I looked at that text and then set the phone face down, and for the first time, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was not just going to expose her lie. I was going to separate that child from the lie and end Michelle's control at the same time. The meeting was set for Friday night in my parents' living room, the same room where Michelle had chosen to drop her bomb the first time. When Martin suggested a neutral location, I was the one who said no. I wanted this to happen under the same warm yellow lamps, beside the same coffee table, in the same room Michelle had turned into a stage for her lie. If this story was going to close, it needed to close where it had been dirtied. I arrived 10 minutes early in a dark, simple outfit, my hair tied back, no real makeup, and an expression my family had not seen from me very often. I was not wearing morning clothes anymore. That detail mattered to me more than I expected. Some part of me knew I was not walking into that house as a woman lost in grief. I was walking in as the last person standing between the truth and a story trying to swallow it whole. The living room had been cleaned carefully. My father had pulled extra chairs in from the dining room. My mother had put water on the table and kept touching the edge of a chair over and over, a nervous habit she has when she wants control over something she cannot control. Aunt Carol was there, perched at the edge of the sofa, looking both curious and afraid. Uncle Richard stood near the window with his arms folded, unreadable. Martin sat at my right with a neat file resting across his lap, calm enough that it slowed my heartbeat a little. Michelle came last, exactly the way someone comes when they want every eye in the room to land on them. She was with a younger lawyer than I expected, dressed in a gray suit and carrying a thin case file, looking cautious in the way people do when they know this is no longer a normal family talk. Lucas was not there. I had insisted on that. For the first time in all of this, Michelle had to walk into a room without using her child as a prop. The second she stepped in, I felt the room tighten. Michelle wore a pale blue dress, full makeup, eyes slightly red like she had cried just enough to look wounded, but still pretty. She sat across from me, put her purse by her chair, and let out a slow breath like she was the one being unfairly dragged through something painful. Martin opened the meeting simply. He said we were there to address Michelle's claims regarding Adam, Lucas, and the house. Michelle nodded and, in a soft, sad voice, said she had never wanted a fight and that everything she had done was only for her son's future. I stayed still with my hands folded together and listened. I did not need to interrupt. I needed her to keep talking. The more she said, the deeper she would walk into the part of the ground that was about to give way. She started exactly how I expected. Slow voice, small pauses, carefully placed emotion. Like the most painful thing in her life was being forced to tell a truth she had bravely carried alone. Her lawyer opened his folder and placed a copy of the fake page on the coffee table. The air in the room changed again. People still looked at that paper like maybe it could save her story. Martin let her finish. He did not interrupt. He did not react. He simply opened his own file. I stayed quiet, too. Michelle repeated that Adam knew his responsibility, that she had stayed silent too long, that Lucas deserved what belonged to him. Those words had rattled people before. That night, they still sounded smooth, but they no longer felt solid. Maybe because now I knew exactly where they led. When Michelle stopped to wipe her eyes, Martin placed a different document on the table and turned it first toward Michelle's lawyer. In the calmest voice possible, he said this was Adam White's actual valid will, fully notarized and fully executed. He did not raise his voice. That made it hit harder. He pointed out that there was no private edition like the one Michelle claimed, no hidden clause, no legal basis for what she was demanding. I watched Michelle's lawyer take the real will and read it, and I saw his face change page by page. In that moment, I realized Michelle probably had not told even him the full truth. She had built a whole stage, but had not been honest enough even with her own side about the hole in the floor. Michelle changed tactics immediately. She said Adam was good at hiding things. She said men can arrange papers to protect their names after they die. That line made my stomach turn because of how shameless it was, but it also showed me something important. She had already left the ground of evidence and run back toward emotion and assumptions. I rested my hand on the medical file in my lap and felt the edge of the paper press against my palm. Michelle kept talking, still trying to keep the story alive for a few more minutes. I looked at her and knew the next moment would change everything. I did not wait for her to finish. I placed the medical file on the coffee table, opened it to the marked page, and said slowly, clearly, in a voice no one in that room could pretend not to hear, Adam had a vasectomy 2 years before Lucas was conceived. The sentence landed in the room like a heavy object, not loud, but final. Michelle froze. Her lawyer turned fully toward me. My mother's hands locked together so tightly her knuckles went white. Martin pulled the file forward and turned the pages one by one with a calm that almost felt merciless. He showed the date of the procedure, the follow-up notes, the lab result confirming it had worked. There was nothing fuzzy, nothing emotional, nothing to twist. I sat still, listening to the pages turn, listening to my own heartbeat settle into something slow and steady. And for the first time since Adam died, I did not feel like I was defending myself barehanded. Michelle reacted exactly the way Martin predicted she would. She blinked too fast, her mouth falling open before she quickly said procedures like that can fail. Martin did not argue in an emotional way. He simply pointed to the follow-up lab result and read the doctor's conclusion. Then he set the paper down. That was the moment I saw real panic enter Michelle's face. She was still sitting there in her careful makeup, still trying to keep the look of a wounded mother, but the control was gone. Before she could drag the story somewhere else, I spoke. I said the ugliest part of this was not just the lie itself. The ugliest part was that Michelle had forced me to drag my dead husband's private medical records into the middle of a family room just to defend his name. My throat burned when I said that, because it was the truest thing in the room. I hated every second of it. I hated that Adam was not there to speak for himself, and I hated that my sister had chosen that exact pain as her tool. My mother started crying, but her tears could not change the direction of anything now. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking like age had fallen onto him all at once. Michelle moved straight into the oldest trick she had. She said everyone was treating her like a monster. She said she was only trying to protect her son. She said I was humiliating a single mother in front of her own family. At another time in my life, words like that might have made me step back. That night, they only made the truth sharper. Michelle was not speaking like someone who wanted honesty. She was speaking like someone who had just realized tears could not fix paperwork. Martin did not close the file. He pulled out another small stack of papers and said the worst part of this story had not even been the false claim about paternity. He explained that Adam had kept records of Michelle's behavior over a long period of time, not because he was petty, but because he had started to realize he might need to protect himself. When he said that, Michelle turned toward me so fast it was almost violent. For the first time, she understood she was not the only person who had walked into that room prepared. I nodded to Martin, then picked up some of the screenshots myself. My hands were steadier than I expected. I read one late-night text Michelle had sent Adam asking when I would be out of town. I read another saying that if he ever changed his mind, Jessica never had to know. Hearing those words in my parents' living room made them feel even dirtier than they had on paper. Michelle started shaking her head at once. She said Adam misunderstood her, that the texts were jokes taken the wrong way. I looked at her and felt the coldest thing of all. She was still trying to rewrite meaning in real time, even now. Martin then brought up Adam's written account of the Christmas incident in the garage, when Michelle had tried to kiss him and he pushed her away. My father jerked his head up. My mother covered her mouth. Uncle Richard finally dropped his crossed arm posture and looked honestly shocked. I looked at Michelle and said very plainly that this was never some secret romance that had been buried. This was a long-running plan built out of jealousy, obsession, and opportunity. She had tested Adam's reactions, tested my limits, then stored away a story she could use the moment she needed money and leverage. That was when Aunt Carol asked the simplest and cruelest question of the whole night. Then who is Lucas's father? Michelle went completely still. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said it did not matter. That was the moment the whole thing finally collapsed. Because if this had really been about truth for her son, that would have been the first question she had prepared to answer. After Aunt Carol asked that question, Michelle sat frozen for a few seconds that felt much longer than they really were. Then she started crying in a way that was no longer controlled. Not the carefully timed cracking voice from earlier, not the polished shaking, real ugly crying, mascara running, shoulders jerking, and for the first time that night, she no longer looked like a woman performing well. She looked like somebody who had just watched the last door slam shut. But even then, she still did not tell the full truth. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. She said she only wanted Lucas to have a better future, a better name, a kind of security she had never had. She said I had always had the house, the marriage, the good husband, while she had always had to live on whatever scraps life left behind. And hearing that, I finally understood the thing I had only half seen for years. Underneath all the chaos, all the lies, all the tears about motherhood, what had always driven Michelle was envy. I let her talk all the way through it. I did not interrupt. I wanted every person in that room to hear the truth coming out of her, even twisted and covered in excuses. When she finally stopped to breathe, I spoke. You are not missing things because I had more than you. You are missing things because you turn everyone near you into a tool. You are not protecting your son. You are using him. You are not hurt because you were abandoned. You are angry because this time you cannot control the story anymore. Nobody said a word. My mother cried openly. My father turned his face away, like he could not stand to look directly at the daughter he had protected so many times. Michelle's lawyer sat stiff and silent, the face of a man realizing he had been dragged into something uglier than he had understood. Martin, on the other hand, stayed perfectly calm. Then he laid out the possible legal consequences if I chose to pursue them all the way. Forgery, defamation, filing property claims without basis. Every term he said added more weight to the room. I looked at Michelle for a long moment, then gave my conditions. She would sign a formal statement withdrawing every property claim connected to Adam or my house. She would admit in front of the family that Lucas was not Adam's child. She would stop all future statements suggesting otherwise. And if she wanted any continued support from our parents, she would have to enter therapy and start taking responsibility for her own life. Then I added the final condition, the one that made Michelle snap her head up at me. If she complied, I would not release every piece of evidence beyond what was legally necessary, because Lucas did not deserve to grow up buried under the ashes of her lie. That night, I did not save Michelle. I saved that child, and I saved the last clean piece of myself too. The next morning, my house was quiet in a different way. It was no longer the thick silence of early widowhood when I kept expecting Adam's footsteps in another room. This was the silence that comes after a storm, when the furniture is still where it always was, but the air has changed. I stood in the kitchen making coffee, watching the sunlight fall across the stone counter, and realized my chest no longer felt clenched shut. Martin emailed around 9. He said Michelle's lawyer had reached out and wanted to draft the paperwork, withdrawing all claims tied to Adam's estate and ending any future statements about Adam being Lucas's father. I read every line slowly, almost like my body needed extra time to believe that something this ugly could actually end through documents and signatures. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was lighter, though the lightness still carried grief inside it. About half an hour later, my father called. His voice sounded rough, tired, older than it had the day before. He did not offer some polished apology. He simply said he should have believed me sooner, and that he was deeply sorry Adam had been dragged into something so ugly when he was no longer here to defend himself. The clumsy honesty of that apology made it feel more real than anything carefully prepared would have. My mother did not call. Her silence hurt, but it did not surprise me. She had spent her whole life choosing peace over truth. Facing consequences was always going to be the hardest part for her. And for the first time, I did not chase after her to make it easier. I went upstairs, opened the closet, took down one of Adam's gray sweaters, and held it against my chest. His smell was almost gone, but there was still enough left to make my eyes sting. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "I stood up for you. I did it." Then I went downstairs, changed the code on the front door, called a security company, and scheduled an appointment with a therapist. I did not want to just survive this. I wanted to live differently after it. A few days later, I met my parents at a small coffee shop near the park instead of their house. That was on purpose. I did not want to sit again in the living room where everything had been twisted into theater. I got there early, sat near the window, watched people walking outside, and reminded myself this meeting was not about fixing everything in one morning. It was about naming what would change from now on. My mother arrived first, looking worn down, her eyes swollen like she had cried more than once. My father sat down beside her with a caution he had rarely shown me before, like they were both finally realizing I was not there to return to my usual place in the family. I told them plainly that I would not attend any gathering where Michelle was present unless I had advance notice and agreed to it. I would not take calls asking me to give her one more chance. I would not leave any documents, finances, or private parts of my life within reach of someone who had already tried to take from me through lies. As I said each sentence, I felt like I was building a fence that should have existed years ago. My mother started crying again and apologizing, but even her apology still had excuses woven into it. She said Michelle needed help. She said she could not just abandon her daughter. I told her I understood that. And then, for the first time, I said what understanding meant from my side. If they wanted to help Michelle, that was their choice. But helping her did not mean using me as the cushion that made the family less uncomfortable. If they wanted to support her, they could pay for therapy, help her get financially stable, insist she take responsibility for her life. But I was no longer going to be part of the rescue plan. My father nodded first. My mother took longer, but eventually she nodded too. I knew one nod could not erase a lifetime of favoritism and denial, but it was still something new. For the first time in this family, my boundaries were not being treated like selfishness. They were being called what they really were. Of all the ugly things Michelle had done, the one that stayed with me the longest was Lucas. He never asked to be born into a lie, and he certainly did not deserve to have his name used like a key to somebody else's house. After the confrontation at my parents' place, I sat in my car for a long time before going inside, thinking about the line between justice and cruelty. I could have pushed farther. I could have released everything. I could have let Michelle drown in the same public humiliation she tried to create for me. But if I did that, the ashes of that fire would land on a little boy first. So I told Martin to add one more clear clause to the agreement. If Michelle withdrew every claim, stopped all future lies about Adam, and followed the terms we set, I would not release the full file beyond what was legally necessary. That decision did not come from weakness. It came from a new boundary I had finally learned how to see. Letting adults escape consequences and protecting a child from their damage are two very different things. I also sent my parents a late birthday gift for Lucas, just a set of board books and a small navy sweater. While wrapping it, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, asking myself whether I was being foolish again. Then I understood something that mattered more. I was not doing it for Michelle. I was doing it because I wanted to choose what kind of person I would be after all this. I did not need to become hard and empty to prove I was strong. I only needed to stop letting my kindness be used as a bridge for other people to walk across. One early spring afternoon, I stood on my back porch looking at the grass Adam had always kept neatly cut, now coming in green again. The air was still cold, but not the same cold as those first days after he died. I understood my life would never go back to the old version, and maybe that was right. I had kept the house. I had protected the truth about my husband. But more than that, I had kept the ability to choose kindness without betraying myself.
I am Sophia, and after walking through Jessica's story with her, what stays with me is not just the twist at the end. What stays with me is the ache of watching a woman who had just lost her husband still have to stand up and defend his name against her own blood. Some pain comes from loss, some pain comes from betrayal, but the deepest kind is when those two things arrive at the same time. Jessica did not win because she shouted louder than Michelle. She did not win because luck happened to be on her side. She won because in one of the darkest moments of her life, she stayed steady enough to hold on to the truth. She did not let fake tears, family pressure, or old guilt drag her in the wrong direction. She understood something many people take years to learn. Kindness is not a substitute for boundaries. If you keep giving in just to keep peace, one day people will start treating your patience like an unlocked door and walk right in to take whatever they want. That is the first lesson in this story. Do not confuse kindness with erasing yourself. Kindness is keeping your dignity even when you are hurt. Kindness is refusing blind revenge when you have the chance. But erasing yourself is when you accept being treated badly just so nobody else feels uncomfortable. Jessica had lived that way inside her family for years. She was the easy daughter, the understanding sister, the one expected to know better, and because she was always the one who knew better, she nearly lost the right to protect herself. The second lesson goes even deeper. Family does not automatically mean safety. Shared blood does not mean shared character. Some relatives love you in healthy ways. Others want control. They want access. They want to drain your stability to patch holes in their own lives. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in that pattern, if you have always been the one expected to yield, to smooth, to be the adult in every conflict, then I want to tell you something. That exhaustion is real, and wanting it to stop does not make you cruel. The third lesson is about truth. Truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it lives in paperwork, in memory, in the way someone consistently lived their life. Michelle built an entire story out of emotion, but it still lost to truth that had been carefully preserved. So when you know you are right, do not let people drag you into a battle made only of noise, guilt, and manipulation. Calm is not weakness. Sometimes calm is the strongest kind of power there is. What I respect most about Jessica is that she did not choose total destruction just to feel like she had won. She drew a clean line between adults who created harm and a child trapped inside that harm. This was not revenge for the sake of revenge. It was a moral choice made by a woman who had already been hurt enough and still refused to let pain turn her cruel. If Jessica's story touched something in you, then ask yourself one honest question. Is there a place in your life where you are calling something love when it is really just endurance? Is there a relationship surviving only because you stay silent? Is there a boundary you have known you needed for a long time, but keep delaying because you are afraid people will call you selfish? Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you want more family drama stories like this one, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it today, and subscribe to the Family Drama True Story channel. I am Sophia, and I want to hear what you think in the comments. Was Jessica too kind? Or was that the hardest kind of strength there is? I will see you in the next story.